Welcome to Lorecraft, creating memorable characters.
Hello, Blizzcon! Hello, huzzah!
Wow, what a crowd. Coming in hot.
You guys are great. I'm Timothy Lorecraft. I am the producer for narrative development in creative development. I am joined on stage by my fellow coworkers, Mio Del Rosario, who's a senior storyboard artist, Jason Hill, associate project director, George Kirstick, head of story, Christy Golden, senior writer, Kate Gary, senior publisher, editor, and Sean Copeland, our historian supervisor. We're here to talk to you about how we help craft story. This is actually where we work. This is our one of our lobbies of our building.
There's more to it than
there's more to it than the lobby, but it's really nice. We're here to talk about kind of like how we work with each of the development teams, each of the game teams, to help craft narrative story for their IPs. So whether that's comic books, novels, cinematics, short stories, that's what we're here to talk about. So we sit in a room with them throughout the week and just break story, talk about the stories they want to tell. And one of those fixtures that's always in the room, and let him start us off, is Sean Copeland, our senior historian supervisor. Talk to us about why you're in the room.
Thank you, Tim. Before I do that, I actually need to take a moment for Tim here. He is actually kind of like our central nervous system for all of our team. He keeps all of us. He's herding all the cats, and we're really lucky to have him. But
thank you, Sean.
For what I do, actually, is my title is historian supervisor, but it's really easy to think of me as Blizzard Entertainment's lore master. My job is to cultivate the lore of the past to inspire the story that we get to shape today. And I guess you can kind of consider me the voice of stories past, in a way. And it's one of the things I do. It's kind of funny. I was just talking to Sylvanas backstage for a little bit.
Bill Sylvanas?
The Sylvanas, the VO actress, yeah. She was asking me, I just finished the Arthas novel, and I needed to know, where do I go from here to get me to what we saw in the Warbringers pieces? And I was like, this is what I do. Awesome. I get to teach the Banshee Queen about her lore. So it was a really awesome moment, but I get to do that for each and every one up here. And
You're never off the clock. Well, let's talk about lore in the sense that we have something we've coined as a term, lore yoga, in the room. And that's something you can probably enlighten everyone on.
Okay, yeah, so lore yoga actually is a silly term that we coined to describe what lore masters do when we're trying to seek out a solve within the established franchise lore. So I guess one way on a mega scale would be what we did for the Warcraft Chronicle series of books. So it's a great memory. Back in the day when we first started on this multi-layer initiative, I was sitting in the room with Metzen, and he's like, Sean, we're going to need your doctorate in Azerothian history for this one, my friend. And I was like, bring it. It's going to be awesome. But mega-wise, I was able to take all of the 20-plus years of Azerothian lore, either had been made or at that time being made, and provide that as a roadmap to our writers so they could take the story that they're trying to tell over 3 volumes of lore to try to smooth out all that we had created from then until now. That's where I was helping them along. I was being their guide throughout the entire journey. And lore yoga, sometimes the lore doesn't bend as perfectly as we want, and unfortunately, some things we have to get lore calls on. And for those moments, I want to make sure that you guys know we take those super seriously. When in moments like that happen, I give them all of the roadmap, what happened, the situation itself, and like 4 or 5 suggestions of how we can work around it in case we need to, if we want to go a certain way. At the end of the day, though, when we have to do that, it's to make a better story. Mm-hmm. We're always trying to think about that as our North Star for all that we do while we're creating our characters, all the things that we work on. Story is king, really.
Right.
But I guess that was like that on a mega scale. If we want to talk about what I do on a more meta scale, 2 examples I'd love to share. The first one is the Reinhardt animated short, Honor and Glory. For that moment, I was working with George here, and I was giving him a tour of Eichenwald, because he was looking at the story, and they wanted to get the logistics and how things work. And while we were in the bar area, I showed him the writing on the bar of Reinhardt's name, because, you know, rite of passage, we all carve our names into bars when we go visit them. But for that moment alone, George was like, that's it, I can jump on that.
Arrogant fool.
That arrogant fool, it's a story moment. It speaks to his character. So that was fun to show him because that actually, as you saw, it ended up in the animation, as we saw. And then the one that's a personal source of pride for me would be Varrock Sarfang in The Old Soldier and what you recently saw in Lost Honor. So back when we were first starting the process on Old Soldier, the director, Mark Messenger, comes to me and he's like, Sean, I need a battle-hardened orc. I need someone who has lived through wars. And I was like, I got exactly who you need. And being able to provide Varrock Sarfang, veteran of the First, Second, and Third Wars, veteran of the events of World of Warcraft, I'm like, this is your guy. And I was able to share his life story so well that he actually ended up being the character they used in these animation shorts. And then even on top of that, we got to start helping flesh out new lore with Zakan. Everybody loves to say Zappy Boy. So these moments are very special to me because, like I said, story is king, but the lore is also very important. So much that they keep someone like myself on to help inspire and to help keep these stories going as we continually flesh out and jam out new content.
Yeah, you're always a source of just inspiration and just help. Thank you so much.
And then, thank you.
So we have a character of Sarfang, which you kind of got us rolling with, and we created more stories with. Let's talk about that character with our head of story, like character versus plot. When we tell a story, how important is character?
That age-old conflict between character and plot. Well, I'm going to say something that's going to sound strange to everyone who came here for a panel about story, but character is more important than story because character is story. And it took me a while to figure that out. I was kind of brought up in the three-act structure mentality, beginning, middle, and end, setup and payoff. You know, there's a couple mentalities there, like Robert McKee's story. Then there's Save the Cat, and Save the Cat Strikes Back, and Revenge. Fantastic sequel.
Revenge of the Cat Saving.
So these are all kind of mentalities that say there's a formula to story. And a few years ago, I realized that that is not important. What's important is the character, who they are, what they want, their needs, their dreams, their fears. And if you know those things, the story comes naturally. And something that I really love about Blizzard and about the characters that we work with here day to day is that they are not trapped in amber. They're constantly evolving. They're constantly making choices, some good, some bad, and they face the music on those. But a wonderful example of that in recent history, and Sean, you just mentioned it, was Old Soldier. It's a very quiet story. And what's wonderful about it is we have two characters being very vulnerable but strong at the same time. And they're speaking to their characters. We have Sarfang, who is mourning his son, and he's looking for a direction in terms of his life, possibly his death, and also his people, the Horde. And then we have Zappy Boy, who's looking for a father figure. And these two characters find each other. And they also find the strength to come back to the Horde and hopefully keep fighting on. And another character, and hopefully you guys just recently saw this, that really spoke to me, had a wonderful moment, was in Lost Honor, where we have Anduin again expressing vulnerability, and we have these two characters, very quiet moment, not much action, but a titanic plot shift in what's going to happen next. I always think about Anduin in terms of a conversation Christy and I had a while ago. We've seen Anduin grow up. We've seen him go from boy to king. We've seen him kind of take control of his people and make some decisions moving forward. And something Christy said to me, I've been the mother of so many characters. I've seen Anduin go from short pants to becoming a king. So you've been a mother to many characters, and then also a murderess of many characters, right? So I find that fascinating that we constantly evolve our characters, and we constantly push the story forward in doing that.
Well, let's talk about character development and the characters that we've seen in your novel. Let's talk about novels right now. Christy, you wrote a little novel called Before the Storm, where you kind of talk about Anduin This is not short pants Anduin, but it's more
no.
older Anduin. Why don't you talk about that novel a little bit and how you kind of got those character stories through?
Absolutely. It was really great. I first started writing about Anduin in The Shattering, and he was about 12 or 13 at that point. And we all remember him, and for those of us who played vanilla, we all remember that. And remember, he was just this little kid, and if you poked him, he'd say, "Do you have news of my father? Welcome to Stormwind, friend." And so I got to take him through the course of the books, and that was embraced by the game team, and they created a teenage model and put him in Pandaria. And now he's head of the Alliance, and now he's facing, you know, a very grave decision. And again, you were just talking about smaller stories, more character-driven. My marching orders were they really wanted to see, the game team wanted to see a character-based story. Compare and contrast these two very strong characters, their leadership styles, their histories, and what they bring to conflict. And so we had a very small story with not a whole lot of repercussions, but it was such a huge shift in how we viewed both of those characters. And to, again, get to write him for Lost Honor was amazing, and it's such an honor to be shepherding him. I've worked with a lot of characters. I've been writing Blizzard novels for 18 years. And so I got to see Thrall when he was a little baby and raise him. And Jaina, worked with Jaina a lot. And it's been a very, very exciting time just kind of seeing how these things go. And, you know, long form is a very different medium. And so when I came to Blizzard as a full-time employee, I had to learn some other different disciplines. One of them was the cinematic. As I did a lot of theater in my younger days, and one of the things I do get to do here is do temp VO work, so that's kind of fun. And I do have a special Blizzcon announcement, and that is a lot of you have said that you wanted to hear audiobooks of some of our older titles. And I am so happy to announce that I am narrating Lord of the Clans, Rise of the Horde, and the 3 books in the Dark Templar series. And those will be available on Audible super soon, so keep an eye out for that. So I had to learn the cinematics, which was 3 minutes worth as opposed to a whole book to explore something. And I also got to learn how to write comics. And that's when to let the image carry it. What striking image? What needs to be visual? What needs to be spelled out in dialogue so it's super clear? Pacing, tightening, things like that. And that was a real challenge. And I've worked with Kate for many years as the editor of my books here at Blizzard. And I got to work with her on some comics too, which was a lot of fun.
Let's talk a little bit, senior editor Kate Gary. Exploring storytelling in comics is a little bit different than a novel. Like Christy was saying, you've got images to support the written word as well. Can you walk us through the process and how we write comics?
Well, there are some differences with novels, but there are also a lot of similarities. Like I got to edit all of the Battle for Azeroth comics. They're all very character-focused, and they all show characters making really important decisions. Like the Windrunner comic, it's about the sisters deciding whether they can still be a family. Spoiler alerts, hell no. And then we have the Jaina comic. It's about Jaina deciding to be her father's daughter again. The Jaina comic was written by Blizzard's own Andrew R. Robinson with art by Linda Cavallini and Emmanuel Tenderini. As George mentioned, it is a very quiet story. We're getting inside Jaina's psyche. We're in her head at the start of the comic. She's reliving all of her past guilts and regrets. It's like me when I wake up every morning, but on steroids. She's got real problems, is what I'm trying to say. She's just torturing herself with her memories, which sets up the punishment she suffers later in game when she goes to Kul Tiras and is sentenced for treason. And I think we can all relate to that. Like, not the treason so much, but, like that feeling that there's something horrible in her past that we can't ever come back from. And for Jaina, that was when she stood aside and allowed the Horde to kill her dad. And that's what the Jaina comic is about. She goes back to Kul Tiras on the anniversary of Dalen Proudmoore's death. And a really cool thing the comic does is it shows a visual juxtaposition between how Jaina remembers Dalen's death as this horrible, heartbreaking tragedy she couldn't stop. and how her mother and the people of Kultiris remember it as a heartless woman who abandoned her father to die gleefully at the hands of monsters. And what I really love about the Jaina comic is it gives an added dimension to the in-game cinematics. Because it's not that Jaina thought, maybe people are still mad at me, but I'm going to take a chance and go back to Kultiris anyway. No, no, no. She knew for a fact that they hated her. Her own mother thought she was a traitor, and still she goes back because she agrees with them. She wanted harsh punishment. She's the daughter of the sea.
And we can write songs about it.
That's right.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other comics and the IPs that we've helped support. StarCraft.
Right, we took a different approach with the StarCraft monthly comics with Dark Horse. Instead of focusing on iconic characters from the games, we created brand new characters and revealed the world through them. These aren't the superpowered, larger-than-life characters you might be used to. You're not going to see any Kerrigans or Raynors. These are regular, ordinary people whose preconceptions are shattered by the harshness of the Kaprulu sector. They get in over their heads and have to fight for their lives. Which brings me to the first StarCraft monthly comic series, Scavengers, written by Jody Hauser with art by Gabriel Guzman. You can see the cover right up there. Our point of view character is Caleb, brand new guy, engineer, fresh off the farm, just joined the scavenger crew of the Magpie. It's his first time in space. He wants to have a fun adventure with his friend Kira. They find a derelict Protoss ship just floating around, dead by a backwater planet. They figure, hey, let's board it, scavenge its tech. Hooray, what could go wrong? Everything could go wrong.
Everything will go wrong.
It's StarCraft. So you got to read the comic to find out.
Well, let's talk about an Overwatch comic that came out last year where we explored a specific character, Reaper, Raze.
Way to give away
Yeah, spoiler.
the worst secret in Overwatch.
Spoilers.
Retribution.
Overwatch Retribution. Now, I love a good villain origin story, and that's what this comic is. It sets up the moment in the in-game cutscene when Gabriel Reyes shoots Antonio. And what the comic does is it gives Gabriel a more personal, deeper motivation for doing it. And that's what makes a villain great, right? Like, we get their motivations, we relate with them, but it's their methods that are inexcusable. Now, the Overwatch Retribution comic was written by Blizzard's own Matt Burns with art by Gray Shuko. It starts off with a bombing of an Overwatch facility, a Blackwatch facility, and we find out that Gabriel is very close with Gerard Lacroix, and Gerard is critically injured in the bombing. And we see that Gabriel is really torn up by this. He feels a lot of rage and powerlessness that Overwatch can't stop Talon through traditional means. And a really cool thing that the comic does is it visually shows the link between Gabriel sitting by Gerard's hospital bed and the bomb timer. And the pacing of the panel shows that Gabriel is also a bomb waiting to go off, which he does later when he kills Antonio. And the final panel of the comic is shades of what Gabriel will become going down this dark road, Reaper.
The birth of a villain. We've talked about novels, we've talked about comics. Let's talk about cinematics. We had a few that premiered today. One of them was the McCree piece. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Mio Del Rosario was the head storyboard artist on this piece. I'm going to pass this to you, and why don't you walk us through some of the work you did on McCree working with Jason?
Yeah, sure thing, Tim. So whenever we start working on a new story, we want to make sure that we create moments and ideas that would help us push the character development forward throughout the narrative. So as storyboard artists, me and my team work closely with the directors and the writers to help them visualize the flow of these story moments within the narrative. So when Jason gave me his initial pitch on the McCree episode and how he sees it as a classic Western, that gave me an idea on how I would approach the challenges on how we can develop McCree's character throughout the cinematic. So I want to show you guys some of the storyboards that we did, just to give you guys a thought process and walk you guys through to the approach when we are developing McCree's character in this stage. So this is the very first image that I did for McCree, and if I remember correctly, it took me a few days to get his attitude right in this one image. And I think the real challenge here is finding that balance between preserving what we all know and love about McCree in the game, but at the same time, we want to introduce a new element to his character so that when our audience sees that, they could see him on a different perspective or in a new light. So once I've got this locked down, I was able to make this image as my groundwork or as my foundation in representing McCree throughout the storyboarding process. So, for example, if there's a part in the script where we see, or where it shows that McCree is in a gunfight, or he's taking cover, reloading his gun, or even just as simple as standing still and delivering his lines.
He looks cool.
Yeah, he's definitely looking cool. I was able to easily visualize these moments because I already took my time in exploring and understanding his personality during those early stages. And going back to that very first image that I drew, I was able to create a consistent visual language for his actions and behavior all throughout the piece. So another element that I think helps in the development of our characters' personality is the environment where the story takes place. As storytellers, we want to make sure that we don't dictate the actions or the behavior of our hero, but rather we want to introduce events and moments and see how they would react to it. For example, in the very beginning of the episode, when we hear the explosion outside of the diner, we actually feel that there's danger and chaos outside waiting for McCree. But if we look back at how he responds to that, he just kept his cool and he just
ate his pie.
Yeah, he just ate his pie, maintained his laid-back attitude. And one of the moments that I like is that he even managed to leave a tip on the table before walking out.
It's a good guy.
He's a good guy.
Solid guy.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
And
20%.
it's those simple moments where we can show our character's personality that we don't necessarily see in the game. And that creates them to be more grounded and relatable to our audience. So with that said, and with all those things in mind, through a collaborative process with the people involved in the project, we were able to establish McCree's character and personality in this early stages of development. And hopefully the episode, we get to highlight those traits that makes him special in the Overwatch universe.
That's awesome. Speaking of characters, this guy right here with the thing now, Jason Hill, you did that
me?
piece. Yeah, how about you take it away and talk to us about, developing the game.
So yeah, way back in the before time, in the long, long ago, I've aged so much since we started this.
We all have.
We all have, yeah, we all have. Yeah. George came to me at one point. He's like, "Hey, do you like westerns?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like westerns. Of course, I like westerns." He's like, "You want to do a western?" Am I doing that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, perfect.
You like cowboys, kid?
You like cowboys? So I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And so when somebody approaches you with that and asks you that, it pretty much means McCree at this. You know what you're in for. And so absolutely, I was totally down with that. I'm like, yes, let's do a McCree piece. But at that point, we kind of knew McCree, and I feel like everybody here kind of had a good feeling for who McCree was, his personality and style. I mean, Matt Mercer brings so much to the character with the voice. Just everything about McCree is like, we know who this character is. So the initial pitch was McCree, and there's the train wreck, and he gets the payload at the end with the thing, and he meets the Deadlock Gang. And for me personally, the appeal was figuring out who the Deadlock Gang was. Because for me, again, when I'm reading a comic or watching TV or a movie or anything like that, and there's a group of characters who are pirates or mobsters or bounty hunters or anything like that. And it's a unique group. And you're looking at them going, I want to know more about them. I want those characters' backstories. And we don't always get that, but it's enough to like just your imagination is just going crazy. And so I really wanted that with the Deadlock Gang. So as the script evolved, before we even started storyboards with Mio, I went to Mio and I was like, okay, we just need what we call basically beat boards. So like there's a couple of beats in the piece that we know we're gonna have. We want you to kind of draw this stuff out and get a feel for it. So I pitched, giant Omnic Enforcer, Enforcer Omnic, because at this point we'd only seen humanoid Omnics. We hadn't seen, and we'd seen Bastion style. We hadn't seen, Omnics can be all shapes and sizes. There's no reason they have to be
like bigger.
the same model. So let's do something unique with him. And the leader, I wanted a strong female with just, the wide brim hat and the duster and the lever action rifle and a couple other members of the gang. And so Mio's like, great, got it. And he ran off while we kept kind of churning on the script. And very soon he came back with this image. And this may be the very first image of Ash ever drawn.
Yeah.
And first image of Bob ever drawn too, for that matter. But this captured exactly what I was going for. I was like, oh my God, yes, this Omnic in the back with the giant mustache, that's genius. And then, Ash just has so much attitude and personality, and just like, your eye goes right to her. And then we have these other, cool other members of the gang that, they had skull masks and stuff, and that's a little like,
Right.
Anyway, but they were still very cool too. So after we did the storyboard process and after we got the script going and everything was working together, at that point it was time to do more detailed concepts of Ash. And so we brought on Zhang-Ha Li, who's one of our concept artists, and she is phenomenal. And so we did the pitch, big broad hat, the duster, the whole thing, and these are the first images, the first concepts of Ash. And they're awesome. They're really cool. Like that is a cool looking character. But it's not an Overwatch character. Overwatch characters, we like to have a little extra juice, a little extra, there's something special, special sauce to them that makes them stand out as something really special. And the more we looked at her, the more kind of realized she kind of looks like a kind of a gothic, like a werewolf hunter or a vampire hunter or something
Bit of
like
a Van
that.
Helsing vibe.
Yeah, so it was something where like, okay, I think we need to potentially look at pushing this farther left or right, but there was one other big problem. The more we looked at it, we realized there was a bigger issue. In both gameplay and cinematics, silhouettes are so important to be able to read a character quickly. If they're running through the scene or if there's an action scene, you want to be able to tell who that character is, who that was. And her color palette and the duster and everything, it's just too much like Reaper. So at that point, we realized we have to explore space. We asked Zhang-Ha, just go to town, give us a bunch of different versions of Ash. And so she did. She did 20, 30 versions. These are a couple different versions. The one on the left, these are all the ones we liked a lot. One on the left, fantastic. It's a great design, but it had the same problem with Reapers. It was too much like McCree in both color palette, and it was too much of a kind of like cowgirl, and we did not want a female McCree. Ash needed to stand on her own. We needed something unique and special for her. The second one, a little too punk rock. Cool, but punk rock. The third one, I love the third one. I'm literally going to take this third one, stick it in my back pocket. You will see it again later in something somewhere.
Like a skin.
Skins. I'm not.
Skin.
Yeah.
Nothing is lost.
Somewhere. It's super. It's fantastic. But the key word, it's super. Actually, was the key word, and she looks like a superhero, not the leader of a biker gang. And so at that point, we're like, okay, we have to kind of start pushing back towards the biker gang. At the next one, we're getting closer, but a little too youthful. Didn't have that kind of the presence that we're looking for out of Ash. The next one on the very end, again, very cool. Went a little steampunk, a little 19s, 20s, 30s mobster style. But they're all super cool, and they all have elements in them that we started to pull from, and eventually we ended up with the final design for Ash, which is a super strong silhouette, just a great character. Like we saw her, and we're like, yes, this character, I can't wait to see what, this character animated and everything like that. There was one thing we had to change, and that was her hair. Mm-hmm. We had to change her hair, mostly for technical, initially it was for technical reasons. In both game engines and for cinematics, long, flowing, simulated hair is very difficult. So we actually said, okay, let's explore a couple different haircuts. And we kind of gave her this offset bob, that is a pun, the offset bob, but it actually gave her a more a much more dynamic, stylized, striking look, and much more edgier. And it was like, this is a win. So this was fantastic. So at that point, we had the script, and we have the designs and the storyboards, and we were working on animation. But ultimately, like, what is Ash's origin? Like, who was she?
Especially because she's gonna be a character in the game.
How does she, she's gonna be a character in the game. So just like about 30, 40 minutes ago, we actually debuted Ash's origin piece on the Mythic stage, but we'd like to run it all for you guys right here, right now. Can we roll the clip?
Want to see Ash's origin?
Hold on, let's see it.
Everybody needs a family. Because it's not fair facing the world alone. I don't care how tough you think you are. They should always be there for support, no matter what. In the best of times, they will arm you with the tools to succeed. And in the worst of times, they will understand when things don't really go the way you planned. Now, some people are lucky enough to be born into the perfect family. Others, well, they go out and make one on their own. And once you've done that, anything is possible if everyone pulls their own weight. So, if you want to be part of my family, I do have one little rule. It's my way. Or, well, who am I kidding? It's my way.
So there's a little bit of background on Ash, and I'm sure we'll get to explore her even more in the future. But you can't talk about Ash without talking about the rest of the Deadlock Gang. And the Deadlock Gang was, again, a group that we wanted to create really unique characters and characters that hopefully we can see again in the future. But more importantly, you can't talk about Ash without talking about Bob.
Oh, yeah.
What about Bob?
So Mio did the original concepts and drawings for Bob in the storyboards, and everybody just loved him, like right out of the gate. Like Bob is my life coach. Bob is my mentor. Bob
There's Bob in every one of us.
But there's a little Bob in everybody. So this was the initial concept for Bob, and this is the final approved design. So what it proved is not only was he my life coach, but he's also apparently a unicorn, because he's super rare in that this never happens in production. You never get a character right from the beginning to the final approved design and be that close, that similar. So we knew that there was something special about Bob. To give another example, here's a very early storyboard of Bob that Mio did. Here's the final shot. So I don't know what to tell you.
It's like you inspired us.
Yes.
Right.
Bob forever. But basically, we also knew that we had to have other members of the gang. And one of the other groups is, we actually call them the triplets. And this was a group that we kind of had to put together, that we wanted some characters that could be in the gang, but not upstage Ash and Bob. We kind of wanted to have them so they could be in the background, but actually play an important role. But if you look at the bottom, there's a bunch of different designs there, and some of them got a little too strong, a little too dominant, whatever you want to call it, that they started to come to the foreground. So eventually we pushed them to the background and found a really nice design that let them sit into the shots, felt like Deadlock characters, but also wouldn't take your attention off of whatever Ash was doing or McCree was doing in the moment. And yes, they are StarCraft fans. There was always the StarCraft comic in the actual Route 66 map. So we do have Zeke, Terran, and PT, and they have the right tattoos. There's tattoos up there. So yes, definitely StarCraft fans. The final member of the gang was Bars, the sniper. This is another character who's only in about 4 shots, but once the designs started coming through, we're like, these designs are awesome. This character, like every one of these characters could be a hero on their own. But yeah, on the right, you can see just how many different head designs we did for bars. And none of them are wrong. They're all great. It's just a matter of, like, ultimately, as a group, we're like, we love that one, or that one's the perfect one. So there was one final piece to the Deadlock puzzle for me, and that is, who is Ash? Who's the voice of Ash? When she speaks, like, who brings the character alive? Our animators are doing a fantastic job. She looks great, stuff like that. And Matt Mercer being McCree, he is so strong and talented, and he just brings so much to that character. I need somebody who could go toe-to-toe with Matt Mercer and McCree. So I had an idea for an actress very early on that I wanted to use, but as a director, I didn't want my personal opinions to kind of, muddy the waters and be like, oh, this is who I really want. But so we sent out basically a casting call our VO director does. We get a bunch of actresses to audition, and they did phenomenal. There were so many really good, phenomenal actresses. We've been lucky to have any of them, and there's some I'm going to save for other things. Put those in the back pocket too, because we won't talk about that. But my editor Nathan took the final select. So there were about 10. And I think it was on about and he basically, we had the image of Ash on the screen. He was playing all the VO lines of all the different actresses, and he got to about the 5th one, and I'm like, that's it, that's Ash. And he just started laughing at me, and I'm like, why are you laughing at me? He's like, you just picked the person who was your original pick back early in production, who you originally wanted, and that was Jennifer Hale. And Jennifer Hale, she is just...
I guess you have good instincts, Jason.
She is... just phenomenal. First of all, being a total sweetheart, but she can bring any character to life. She is, if you've heard her and may not even known you've heard her. So definitely, if you haven't, IMDb her. She's done everything. She was just a treat to work with, and just we are so lucky to actually have been able to get her for this character. The other big plus was that we were actually able to get them in the booth together. And they recorded a lot of their lines together, playing off each other, riffing off of each other, improvising. And so getting to see them together was just a wonderful experience. And I personally really can't wait to see what the game team does with Ash in the future, with Jennifer basically doing the voice for her. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just a great cast, a great group of characters, and it was a super fun piece to work on.
Well, begs the question, what happened to Ash? What happened to Bob?
Well, they're on that payload.
Oh, yeah.
I get that. So this is what happened. It's so infectious within Blizzard. I got this question throughout production. Because everybody's like, this is great. But what happened to Ash? And what happened to Bob?
I was just coming into Blizzard when this was starting to be formed, and I was seeing like one of the first animatics. Didn't know very many of the characters, and I was like, but what happened to the one with the derby? Is he okay?
And that's, Ash, that team is infectious, and there's something we all kind of want to see a little bit more. We want just a little bit more time with them. We want to see something, else with them. And we would definitely like to show you something else with them, but...
You're really milking this.
But I am. What are the chances that we would make a cinematic?
I don't know.
One panel for just you guys.
Oh, what are the odds?
Bonus.
I think the odds are actually pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah.
Pretty good.
Ladies and gentlemen,
the
boys
epilogue?
and girls, omnics of all ages, we'd like to present to you Road Trip. Please roll the clip.
Really nice going, Bob. That could have been an easy score, but no! McCree shows his stupid mug and everyone just falls to complete pieces. I should have just put a bullet in him the minute he showed up. That's my bike! McCree! Oh, I hate that guy. What are you looking at?
All right, everyone, we have time for some Q&A. We set aside 20 minutes or so, and I believe during this time, we have a special gift if you are brave enough to ask a question. We have issue number 1 of Scavengers, the comic that Kate was talking about earlier. If you come up and ask a question, you will receive a comic. So please, come up, don't be shy. Throw your questions at us. I see some people coming up now. It's always tough to be the first one.
Who's gonna break the ice?
Go for it.
Okay, this is mostly for Christy Golden and/or like writing on faction-based stories, because there's always that worry about like faction imbalance, and something has to happen, then the other side has to happen. Like you lost Tiarsfall, and then they lost the World Tree. So how often does it happen that you either catch yourself, you're like, oh, this will be such a good idea for the writing and the character progression, but then someone's like, but that can't really happen because the other side's gonna get a little jealous or upset. Like, how often does that come up?
Generally, we get into the writer's room and the team knows what they want to see. And so we work with them, and we always try to think what is going to be true to character, what honors the past, the storyline that's going forward, how is it going to move forward to carry the storyline forward. And sometimes we do try to make sure that everybody enjoys what we do, and representation of your faction is obviously very, very important. So we do think about that, but sometimes the alliance's turn to be a little heavy, but eventually it's gonna come back down, and then we'll have the horde going forward. So it may not be exactly even every single beat, but it does even out, and that is something that we think about because we want everybody to feel that they're involved.
Yeah, we try to be very conscious of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi. I'd love to know the major and important differences when you're making a story and characters for a novel as opposed to a comic.
Generally when I'm doing the media tie-in works, the team has an idea of the sort of story that they want to tell, so we know about who's going to be there and show up. And so we really try to think what serves the story. Before the Storm, it was pretty straightforward. We had these two major characters, and we got to compare and contrast them over this one incident. So going forward, we always try to think about what's true for the characters, how does it advance, and when it comes to supporting characters like Will, and Before the Storm, we actually saw Will way back in the Shattering. And I decided to bring him into the storyline because what happens with him is very significant to Anduin, and it kind of kicks off some of the storyline. So I look at characters that are already existing. I work very closely with Sean. Is there a character that is already existing that fits the bill? If not, we might create one. But it's always fun to go back and visit our old friends and bring them forward after a few times. So we do try to think about what makes a good story. You know, what is an entertaining read? What's going to leave you feeling satisfied at the end? And we do whatever we can to make it turn out that way.
Right, and what stories lend itself more to the inner life of prose, and what stories really benefit from having a visual element. Like Windrunner Three Sisters had some very strong visual motifs,
yes,
like the pendants that the Three Sisters had, and the ghosts of their former self and their brother Lerat. So that's why we chose the comic format for that, because it had such strong visual elements.
Even Magni probably had some of that too, right? The Magni comic?
Oh, the Magni comic also, yeah. The metaphor between the world of Azeroth and Moira in the womb, and then the outside of the womb, and the daughter-father relationship. Yeah, Matt Burns did a great job visually showing the link there. So that's why that was an amazing comic. And also we got to show just how large the Sword of Sargeras was, how honking large. A comic is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And long fiction, you can really go right into the characters' thoughts and know exactly what they're thinking, and that's the format that really, fiction is really the only one that can do it that way, because everything else involves a visual aspect and you can't drop quite as deeply. But you do have the visuals, which it brings a whole other element to a story.
And comics, you have to be very brief with the words. It's not great if you open a page and it's a whole paragraph of text. Like, what am I reading? Why is this a comic? So.
Isn't there some psychology behind like the amount of like words you should have in a bubble?
I mean, there are rules of thumb. Yeah, but I mean, sometimes you do have to explain a lot. So I don't want to restrict people, but in general, if like more than 30% of the panel is text, something is wrong, and people are going to stop and eat a ham sandwich.
Right. A ham, yes. Next question, please.
Okay, this question is for Christy. It would be, who was the hardest character for you to write?
Wow, that's almost as difficult to answer as who is your favorite character, which I get a lot. It really depends on the story, and generally, if I have a good familiarity with the character, if it's a character I've written before or that I can get a lot of backstory on, it's easier for me to settle in. Sometimes if I'm having difficulty writing a character, it's time to step back and say, well, does this angle of the story work? Because if it's not flowing, that might mean that there's a better way to do it. So sometimes if a character is being difficult to manage, that's a signal for me to take back and say, well, maybe I should approach this in another direction. But sometimes they all give me trouble, and sometimes they're all perfect little angels. So it's really hard to say who's the most difficult.
Okay,
Thank you.
Hi, when you guys are working on new characters or updating character designs, is there a certain point at which the character seems to take over their own design?
You could probably speak to that a little bit on.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time the game teams are the ones who are developing their own, the characters and doing the designs and stuff like that, and they usually hand us a design for a character. But in a situation like Ash and Bob, that was something like their personalities, once we started seeing drawings from Mio and things like that, and we had brief descriptions on page of like kind of what the attitude was, and we had even some quick lines of just like, maybe this is the kind of what her internal voice is. They came together, those characters specifically came together really quickly as far as like, everybody got it. Everybody's like, we know what kind of character this is. We know what kind of character Bob is. We know, how this plays out. So, I mean, from a design standpoint,
Well, basically, when we were doing those character designs, I just went off with your description. It was such a solid description that I could almost imagine that final look of theirs and how they would play off with McCree.
Yeah. I was gonna say the Overwatch team just put a tremendous amount of like, trust in us to do that.
They did.
I remember.
They did, and that was like start from scratch. Basically, we started the story without any character models. Basically, only a description from the writing team and from our director.
So, I mean, sometimes it really is the game team's just, here's the design's already given to us. That's sometimes easier, and sometimes we have to find the voice for those characters too. Yeah. But I mean, you can definitely kind of, is there anything you can speak to on as far as helping to find the voice for the characters and the designs?
Certainly, I think it's all part of the whole package, right? It's the teams coming together. It's these rooms. Sometimes someone would throw out an image or a reference, or as you said, someone would write a line. And the more we beat these characters up and stories up, they come to life. And it's interesting that Ash, to your question, I think Ash was someone, she took ownership of her own creation, right?
She really did.
I mean, it was great because I remember when we were breaking story for that Origins piece, we were talking a lot about Ash and Bob, and we were like, Bob should have always been a part of her life in some way, and I think that's how we ended up with Bob the Butler. Basically, the character that took care of her when she was a child, when her parents weren't around.
He's a big omnic butler, B-O-B, or big omnic bodyguard, whichever one you want.
Yeah. Cool, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the creation of side quests in things like World of Warcraft. There's a huge number of elements and characters that you interact with during the course of a zone. And I wanted to know, what was the process of making these that aren't really part of the main line, but still trying to create a really compelling experience?
Well, generally our group doesn't do much of the game questing. However, Christy has actually done some of the in-game writing. I don't know if you could speak to maybe that aspect of helping out the
we
WoW
have
team?
so many talented people at Blizzard, and the World of Warcraft team is absolutely a stellar example of that. Most of the quests that you see are written by the designers themselves. Since I have joined Blizzard, I have been talking to some of them, and sometimes they'll bounce some ideas off of me, or they'll ask for a little bit of feedback or something, and I'm always honored to be able to help them. But there's really just so much talent, and they are so adept at creating fun new characters like Flynn Fairwind. I mean, we all love Flynn. And so they really know that story is important, is why people love this game. It's one of many reasons people love the game so much. And so they give us some really wonderful characters that we'll play. Sometimes I'll use, you may have noticed that I use a lot of NPCs in my book. And that's because I'm like you. I'll play a lot of these quests, and I'll find these characters, and we only have maybe 1 or 2 quests with them, but they're really memorable, and they deserve a little bit more. We brought Cordressa into, you know, semi-major character role, and she was really just kind of a character, an NPC. We have Ol Emma and her quest line and things like that. So it's game team. I give them all the kudos and all the praise, and we love working with them. And it's really fun when we can start having some interplay. If they'll pick a character from a novel and put it in there, which sometimes happens, or if we'll take a character from the game that's maybe minor and give it a bigger spotlight.
Right, and we've had moments in our rooms where we work with Alex and Steve Denuser, and that story with Sarfang where, remember in the middle of the meeting, he's just like, oh, he's got to be in jail. And that's kind of what led us to creating the Lost Honor pose. We were like, this would be a good story. And then, but he wasn't in jail at the time of development. And then Alex is like, let me send a text to my team, and boom. He's in jail, and we have a cinematic.
Well, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm about to graduate with my English degree, and you know, one thing that I've learned is writers are throughout history inspired by current events. And when you look at Overwatch's story with the relationship with Omnyx and how people have various views towards Omnyx, it's easy to see the parallels. My question is, how much are you guys inspired by current events? And if we, you know, have the goal to work on the Blizzard story team at one day, do you think that we should avoid those controversial subjects, or should we try to embrace them and find common ground?
You want,
George?
Absolutely. So yeah, this is something that we're very conscious of. We all live in the same world. We all see the same things, and we're all human beings. So this is part of who we are. And as storytellers, this, you know, comes out in our artwork, whether we want it to or not, right? So I think that it would not be in our best interest to unplug from the real world, right? As creative people, as game designers, as people in general. So, you know, if you want to make stuff, make stuff. Talk about what you want to talk about. Explore the things you want to talk about.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it seems you guys touched on this a little bit, but you have a lot of these awesome tertiary side characters, and when you need something, right, you kind of pull someone into the foreground. So I was wondering, how do you like think about them? Like, how fleshed out are they before they're pulled in, right? If you need a battle-hardened orc, you bring Sourfang in. Like, just how do you think about that?
What's interesting, I'll jump on this, is it's, again, a collaborative situation where we would come into a room and say, we really need a character for this plot point or for someone to do this. And we would turn to Sean, and then we just jam, and he'd say, well, you know, this character might be good, or this situation, we can pull someone out of that. And sometimes it just comes to creating someone new out of whole cloth. So it's a very organic, communicative process. And, you know, to something Sean said earlier, we never try to force it. We never try to break lore or try to, you know, paint a character with a color that doesn't work for that character.
And it was kind of fun, too, when you talk about Zappy Boys we did earlier. We were like, oh, who's this character that's going to interact with Sarfang? And we looked at that announcement cinematic, and we were like, that seems like that troll there might be a good character. Let's flesh that character out more. And I think that's where we found an opportunity to harken back to that announcement cinematic and find a character that was going to play a larger part in the you know, Old Soldier cinematic. So. Cool, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hello. So similar question, but you've talked a lot about the varying time frames for character inspiration. What criteria do you look for to actually make it a character, a playable character?
What?
Playable character? Like
playable
in-game?
one?
Like in-game.
In-game, yeah. Well, we usually take our cues from game team, like their requests, the needs of the game or the level or the gameplay. So we work closely with them, but those usually come kind of over the transom to us.
I think what was interesting was they saw Ash, and they saw that as an opportunity to take a character that we developed and bring that into the game, which I think that might have been one of the first opportunities we'd ever done.
I can only offhand, there may be more. The only other character I can think of that this happened was, I think, Tychus Finley which we created for the original StarCraft 2 cinematic when he was getting suited up. And
Oh, yeah.
they're like, oh, he's awesome. Let's put him in the game. But yeah, something about Ash. We were working on Ash because we were just like, we needed a good villain for McCree at the time, and then and she evolved, and we were falling in love with her. But then we started to hear the whispers from across the street of like, they're really in love with her. Wait, they have multiple people. Jeff Goodman, one of the designers over there, they saw the storyboards that Mio did, and multiple designers over there on their own went out and started building design docs for Ash to go, we love this character, we want to make something with her. And then they all like emailed it almost at the same time to each other and like, I think we got something here that we want to run with. So this, Ash and Bob were something that were created out of necessity originally, but then over the course of production was like, you know what? This is something more. It was something special. So, and hopefully we'll get more of that stuff.
Yeah, and them choosing to make Bob the ult for Ash was like the icing on the cake.
That was the icing.
I think we have time for one more before our time is up.
Yeah.
Hit us.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, so my question's for Sean and anyone else that feel they could contribute to the answer. How do you all keep a track of ongoing storylines, like how character A knows character B, and if they interact with character D, and so on?
So I just delete a lot of my elementary school years and just remove that and stuff, all of that in my... No, honestly, it's another part of what I do is having a good memory makes for a really great lore master, but that's only half of the battle. The other part is knowing where you can store information, where you can refer to it, where you can share it with other people. It's basically knowing how to rely on your brain, which, as I'm learning, fails more and more as we get older, but how to rely more on our resources. So a lot of what I've been doing recently has been fleshing out all of our resources to open it up to the entire company. Because before, there's only 2 lore masters servicing all of Blizzard Entertainment right now, full-time lore masters. So we figured that was kind of a huge bottleneck. So we wanted to open up all of our resources so we can empower Blizzard employees to be their own historians in a way, and then come to us as they need additional guidance as they go through the lore. So basically, it's a 50-50 split.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we're trying to find ways to harvest his brain separately, so it...
I'm about to lose my infant years, too, so...
I'm constantly, I am in Sean and being like, Sean, what is serving? Think of goblins. Tell me now. So thank you, and I'm sorry.
I love to do it, and that's another thing. I am a huge geek about the lore and about how our stories evolve, and having these moments, like Kate just said, I geek out. I'm like, oh, let me tell you about this. This is awesome. So having that and being able to inspire, that's what gets me going every day. That's punching the clock, and I'm like, I'm going to make a difference because I get to share that so nobody flounders in the lore. So if you're like, I'm stuck and I want to get to a certain place, I can help you. And by doing that, I'm like, yes, I did it. So.
Well, that sounds like a good place to end us, making a difference. I like it. That's a good ending note. We hope you all enjoyed our panel. Thank you so much for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your